Well, the agenda this week looked at an area code that has become an identity. It's put a price tag on large scientific initiatives and blasted off with astronaut Chris Hadfield. The agenda's week in review begins, though, with the latest on the Rob Ford crack video allegations. Watch.
I think everybody's seen the allegations against me today. I wish I could come out and defend myself. Unfortunately, I can't because it's before the courts, and that's all I can say right now. I think it's quite. I think it's no. You know what? No. I have no reason to resign. I'm going to go back. I'm going to return my phone calls. I'm going to be out doing what the people elected me to do, and that's save taxpayers' money and run a great government that we've been running for the last 3 years.
I'm not sure, even at the White House, I've heard a news conference where the camera shutters were just going wham, 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 wham all the time. That was really something. What did you see there?
I think what I saw was a man in a little bit of denial. I mean, you know, we talk about the job, okay? And the job doesn't just encompass returning phone calls. That's the problem. I mean, he's a very, very good retail politician. But, you know, I will agree with my colleagues on this panel that he hasn't been able to coalesce counsel and defend, certainly as of late, some of the really strong items that he needed to get through counsel. And it's become a debate about, let's get Rob Ford. I don't necessarily agree that that's always been right. I think the attacks on him have been downright vicious by my media colleagues and by people on council.
Inappropriately so?
Inappropriately and abusive.
Well, hang on a bit, Sue-Ann. You're saying you've all along said we were sort of jackals to go after Rob Ford and being so asking all these impertinent questions. Now a lot of this seems to be factual. So I don't see why we were jackals then and suddenly you're now saying he should quit.
Well, I think some of the commentary, Marcus, in fairness, was abusive. I mean, attacking him about KFC, attacking him about his weight. I think I've never seen a mayor in my 15 years at City Hall that was so scrutinized, who was so attacked abusively, and I think bullied. I mean, bullied.
It's a good thing he was scrutinized because now all this has come out.
You know what? I'm not taking away from what happened in May. I never said that there wasn't a video. I said, show me the video and we'll talk. But I didn't enjoy the circus or the feeding frenzy. And that's what I was against.
We have some feedback to all of what's transpired today, and let's just share this with you because on Facebook, on Twitter, there are some people who've made some comments. Can we bring these up right now and just see what people have had to say about this throughout the course of the day? Do we have here's pro-Ford reaction. This is Ed Costa via Facebook saying, Ford is our man. So what if he smoked a bit of dope? He's a good working boy. How about some more? What will the bloodthirsty hyenas over at the Toronto Star do now? We got one more. If the media hounded me the way they've hounded Rob Ford, I think I might need a few puffs on a crack pipe too. Okay, folks, this is Ford Nation. Yeah. John, is Ford Nation sticking with him come hell or high water?
Well, I think that, you know, the fiction is that Ford represents the common person in the city who's conscious of their taxes. But I don't think the common person cuts out of work, goes to a park, drinks a bunch of vodka, and then gets back in their car. I think there's a great disjunct. There's a disconnect there, and I think that's not. You know, we may have thought that was what we were getting when we elected Ford, but he's a very distracted guy, and he's so yes, there is this kind of there's this sort of support, but I think that once more of the detail about this comes out, it shows a guy who's not as connected to the ordinary voter as.
But Ivor, the question becomes, as more details come out, as they surely will, does that chip away at Ford Nation's love for this man?
Richard Nixon had about 25% support at around the time he quit. finally. So there's always going to be people who, for one reason or another, identify personally, who think this is my guy, who want to support the underdog. I think we've made the mistake of talking about Ford Nation as if it was a monolith, right? As if everyone voted for Rob Ford for the same reason. They didn't, right? He cobbled together a coalition like any other politician. And so, of course, there's going to be a chipping away effect there, but there's always going to be that core of support. And that's just going to be there. And I don't think we should get too fixated on it.
Marcus?
A lot of people are convinced that Mr. Ford is a victim. They buy that narrative that comes from him. I've been to a couple of his Ford fests, and you talk to people, and they say, first of all, they don't believe the crack allegation and so on. Second of all, if it were proven, they wouldn't care, because he's a good guy and he's cutting our taxes.
Because he's a good guy cutting our taxes.
Yeah, and they like the cut of his jib. He's a kind of authentic, regular guy, and they just like him, damn it, and they're not going to let anybody tell them otherwise.
The other thing I heard asking the same questions at the same events was that one guy said to me, he said, you know what, if I had got caught, doing something like this and the media asked me if I'd done it, I'd say no too. Saying no was the, lying about it was the honest thing to do, right?
Lying about doing drugs was the honest thing to do.
From a certain perspective, because that's what you'd do in that situation. Not you personally, of course, but the second person you would do in that situation. It was a relatable thing to do. It was not, say, a phony politician thing to do.
The thing that I'm disappointed with is that he wrote in on this, I'm going to change City Hall, I'm going to make the City Hall more transparent and accountable. And and I saw him over the years he was a councillor. He really tried to make a difference and bring out the spending abuses. But you can't, if you're going to say that, then you can't lie or allegedly lie about your involvement with drugs. And that's the thing that I'm disappointed, and I'm sure some of the people who voted for him in my circle would be disappointed about.
5 years ago this month, Ontarians came to discover how deficient the province's investigations into some criminally suspicious child deaths truly were. Mr. Justice Stephen Gouge released a report showing a shocking number of adults were wrongly convicted of crimes as a result of the testimony of former pathologist Charles Smith. The Gouge inquiry pointed to appalling ethical breaches by Smith, as well as systemic problems inside Ontario's forensic pathology system. 5 years after Gouge, are things any better? Let's ask Michael Polanin, who for 5 years has been the province's chief forensic pathologist and the man tasked with fixing this mess. And we welcome you here to TVO.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, let us understand what you inherited. Would it be accurate to characterize the mess that you inherited as the most egregious systemic miscarriage of criminal justice in Canadian history?
It would be accurate to say that in Ontario we had a number of wrongful convictions that stem from deficient medical evidence, and that did represent a major systemic problem that needed to be fixed.
I'm going a little further than that, though. I'm calling this, and you tell me if I'm overdoing it here, but a systemic miscarriage of criminal justice.
I think that is correct. I would say that what we learned from the Gouge inquiry was that there were a number of failures across all parts of the criminal justice and death investigation system that needed to be strengthened and modernized to improve criminal justice. Basically, what we found out through the inquiry was that the people of Ontario deserve better in terms of its forensic pathology system.
Before we figure out what you did to try to make things better, let's remind everybody of the kinds of things, because we're going back several years now. Charles Smith got on the stand. He was a man who had, we thought, a lot of integrity and a lot of authority to bring his conclusions to bear, and he simply lied and got people convicted. Give us an example.
Well, I think the issue with Dr. Smith and some of the issues that were pervasive at the time in forensic pathology was a misunderstanding of some of the fundamental roles of a forensic pathologist. For example, at the time, one of the mottos was to think dirty. In other words, that there was an a priori stance that forensic pathologists should take when approaching a case. Whereas now, the pervasive view among forensic pathologists is to think truth. So in other words, instead of approaching a case with a specific view about whether or not a criminal act occurred, we now objectively look at the evidence and try and see where the evidence takes us to a logical conclusion.
Essentially go in with an open mind.
Go in with an open mind and go in with the view that credibility is the main issue. and that as a credible expert witness, you must be impartial and really start off with a position of offering the courts and the public what science and medicine can offer in a particular death.
Well, let's do one example, the Mullins-Johnson case. Remind us what happened.
So the Mullins-Johnson case is probably the index case for the Gouge inquiry. And what happened in that case was a man was wrongly convicted of the rape and murder of his 4-year-old niece. And this was largely based upon misinterpretation of autopsy findings. And one of the things that happened in that case, and indeed in many such cases, is that normal changes that the body undergoes after death can be misinterpreted as injuries. If that happens under certain investigative circumstances, the courts may be unable to separate the misinterpretation from truth and go down the path of conviction.
But what happened to Mr. Mullins-Johnson as a result of bad testimony brought forward by Dr. Smith?
So what happened ultimately was he was convicted of first-degree murder, and then through the provisions in the criminal justice system, the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, led by James Lockyer, then brought the case back into a post-conviction review process.
How long was he in jail?
Over 10 years.
10 years in jail for about the most heinous crime you can be accused of committing, and he didn't do it.
Well, the Court of Appeal found that the conviction should be quashed based upon the fresh evidence.
So all of this starts to come to the public's attention, and the provincial government in its wisdom decides that it's going to get to the bottom of it through a public inquiry. They appoint Stephen Gouge, the Supreme Court judge. He holds hearings, makes recommendations. How important do you think those recommendations were to getting things back on track?
Critically important. One of the things that I can say, not as a forensic pathologist, but just as a Canadian, is that the public inquiry system that we have is very robust and is a great mechanism to implement systemic change. And that's exactly what happened with the Gouge inquiry.
21 years as an astronaut, you're now moving on. How did you know it was time now?
When you have 2 days in a row where you don't want to go to work, where you wake up and you just don't want to go to that job, then it's time to think about another job. But for the last 21 years, there wasn't even one day. I just wanted to get to work earlier every single day, so that wasn't it. But having had a chance to fly 3 times in space, and as you say, to command the space station on the last one, I knew I wouldn't be flying in space again. I'd served longer than just about anybody has, and it just made sense.
I want to read a couple of things from your book.
Okay.
This is about your first launch back in 95 on Atlantis. This is what you wrote. I was far too focused on the novelty of what was going on around me to be looking inward. In fact, during ascent, I was checking tables, doing my job, tracking everything I was supposed to track, when I suddenly became aware that my face hurt. Then I realized I'd been smiling so much without even being aware of it that my cheeks were cramping up. More than a quarter of a century after I'd stood in a clearing on Stag Island and gazed up at the night sky, I was finally up there myself, orbiting Earth as a mission specialist on STS-74. Stag Island, southwestern Ontario. Take us back there as a young boy.
Like a lot of folks, my parents have a relatively simple cottage, a nice place to go to in the summer. I was lucky enough to have that as a kid growing up, but very, very basic provisions at the cottage, no television, no connectivity or anything, you just play outside. So the space race was going on. This summer I was going to turn 10, I'm born in August, so I was going to turn 10 that summer. And I'd watched 2001, A Space Odyssey, the movie, went to a friend's birthday party the year prior, I think. And so that fantastic vision that Stanley and Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke put together of 2001, which is all surreal but very visually rich, was in my head. And meanwhile, that was really sort of happening with the space race and with my heroes, and had the big National Geographic poster of the moon above my bed at the cottage. And all of a sudden, it all came to a head in July of '69, and 3 people went to the moon, Mike and Neil and Buzz. And they were just people, Mike and Neil and Buzz. And one of them was called Buzz, which is, just great. And then Neil and Buzz got in their little spaceship and came down and landed on the moon, and I watched them. I had to go over to a neighbor's house because we didn't have a TV, but watched it in a neighbor's living room, crammed with people, which made it even more special. You could tell this was an event. And then went out afterwards and looked up at the moon itself. And it was hugely inspiring. And as a 9-year-old Canadian kid, I just saw that as an incredible, barely possible, brand new human adventure that I wanted to be part of.
How did big science become the predominant approach in so many realms of solving the big mysteries that confront us?
Well, I think we really have to turn to the post-World War status of science and look at the Cold War. The Cold War really got people excited about physics, and it just turned out that at that same time, the mysteries of physics were ripe for big science. So the Cold War essentially allowed both politicians and the public to support physicists and listen to them and give them all the money that they wanted. I think that's how big science really started after World War II.
Well, I want everyone to pick up on the point that you just made. And Neil, let me begin with you. Given what Ash just said, without an enemy or a Cold War, can we still get the level of commitment from governments and buy-in from the public?
I think we can, but I think we need to completely change the approach. I feel that the past generation of particle physics and physicists have had tremendous support, basically trying to go to bigger and bigger colliders, and they were supported very generously by government on the basis of the contributions particle physics had made to the Second World War. I think that time is over. And I think it's time to change the case for big science. And I would include not just experiment, which is essential, but also the idea of raising the access to fundamental science to the vast pool of talent around the world. I think science is no longer a national game, and no one country will lead it. But there are billions of young people around the world who are fascinated with basic science and who deserve the opportunity to get involved. And many of the ways they can get involved are quite cheap, involve high-level training. And let's not forget that many of the breakthroughs in basic science, our picture of the world, were made by very talented, very lucky individuals, like Professor Higgs, who discovered the vacuum is full of this amazing field, the Higgs field. And that was the basis for the discoveries at the Large Hadron Collider.
Well, the mission to put men on the moon had nothing to do with science. It has produced nothing of scientific value. And one of the things that makes the funding of real science so difficult is the competition it faces from a spectator sport, like the manned spaceflight program.
Okay, I know everyone wants to jump in on this.
One thing I can say from here is that we always like to say, there are three main motivators. And, we have to face it. We're fighting millions of years of human evolution, how we're hardwired to see the world. Fear, curiosity, and wealth. And so, yes, the Cold War was motivated by fear. We also do have curiosity and wealth as the motivators. And it's true that we can't always just put pure science for big science. But we do have other ways around it. And I would have to disagree about all of going to the moon as being useless. They did bring back rocks, which are still studied today. And they're still revealing things about the moon that actually are useful for understanding planet formation.
Steve has a profoundly pessimistic worldview, perhaps based on the fact of the extraordinary success of particle physics over the last few decades, as I say, fueled by the role physicists played in the last war. And I think it's very important to change perspective, to realize that the world has changed. The center of gravity is shifting. It will no longer be the United States. And one needs to respond to this by making fundamental science much more open, much better at communicating. And I think he's misinterpreted what I said. I was not advocating some kind of radical new science involving a completely different way of doing science. I was advocating the widespread availability of training of young scientists in other countries than the US. There is talent and genius around the world, and I think physics, fundamental physics, has actually been rather bad at strategically developing youthful talent, bringing it into the field, and enabling people to come up with innovative new ideas. Higgs in his time did that. His ideas were not popular initially. There are many other young people around who are potentially capable of doing that. And in fact, the institute I direct is founded on the idea we need to strategically develop not just big science experiment, but places where people can be imaginative, creative, come up with truly original ideas which live up to the beautiful discoveries we've made about the universe.
Brian, talk to me a little bit about that power imbalance between the 905 and the 416. Where does it play out?
Well, I think Metrolinx is one of the best examples. And a couple of years ago, people were saying, Metrolinx is a great example of how the whole region can work together. And I think, frankly, in the last couple of years, Metrolinx has been the opposite example. And it's been the example of how we're not working together. Because the reality is Metrolinx was established to think about transit from an overall Toronto region standpoint. And politicians were taken off the board, were not allowed onto the board, so that it would be a sort of experts making the right decisions. And then what ended up happening? They came up with a big plan, and one mayor could change everything. So Metrolinx is actually an example of how we're not working together and how Toronto dominates the debate. And so what we had last May was something called the Western GTA Summit, and we had a tagline for that summit, "The West Wants In." And we obviously played off of the Preston Manning, the West wanted in into the Canadian debate, and we grew an unbelievable amount. We started out being 3 cities, it ended up being 2 regions and 7 cities and towns that wanted to get involved. We had great attendance, we had great media, and it was because people in that part of the 905, and frankly we had people in Markham and Durham saying, make it a ring around the donut conference, don't make it just the Western GTA, because I think that the sense in Durham and in York was very similar, that the conversation on what was the right transit was being completely taken over by City Hall and Downtown Relief Line or Scarborough extension of a subway and things like that. And what was important to people that used the GO train or people that would want transit in Mississauga or Brampton or York was being completely no attention was being made by media, which is another problem we have. All of the media we have in this area, other than the Hamilton Spectator, are downtown Toronto focused. They don't know what goes on in Richmond Hill or in Durham or in Peel or Brampton. They don't even know those places exist.
Well, and I think a lot of it too was that this was an area that had high growth needs. I mean, that was sort of the every time you drove around, there was a new subdivision popping up somewhere. There used to be a Greater Toronto Area Hospital Coalition because the hospitals in the 905 area were very frustrated because all the funding formulas were not responding to their growth needs. So that had provoked a whole provincial policy issue. But the other thing that's happening is you've got the Durham region, the east, that is feeling, it looks at the west and it says, well, you guys don't have problems. You got all this money, you got all, whatever. And us poor folks out in Durham region are underfunded because, again, Durham's growth started to happen just in time for government cutbacks. So that was another tension. And when my caucus colleagues and I, there were 5 of us all from the same party in Durham region, and we actually, had a little strategic plan about how between the 5 of us, we were going to gang up on the rest of 905 and whatever to try and get some of the linkages out there and the funding that we needed. And when we were fighting to get 401 expanded out into Durham region and 407, and I can remember one of the officials at Transportation saying, the traffic volume doesn't justify it. So when I got to be a minister, you've got a little bit more clout. I used to schedule meetings in my constituency office at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and say to them, so how do you like the traffic volume studies now? We did. I mean, it did start to go out. But so there's all kinds of growth-related pressures that I think help drive a lot of that difference with 416 and 905.
I would say with the 416, the 905, 416, that's why I say the divide's not as big anymore. Because if you're in certain parts of Etobicoke, certain parts of Scarborough, it feels like you're in the suburbs. Certain parts of Scarborough feel like you're in Scarborough. Certain parts of Scarborough feels like you're in Ajax, etc. I'd say to that, the 905 debate now within the 905 might be greater. So for instance, when I see the York sub, I went to York. So now when I see the York GO train GO bus from Mississauga go straight to York University, I cry. I say, where was that when I was struggling in my car on the 401?
Out of jealousy?
Yes, out of jealousy. I know where all my tuition went at least, right? But then the next part of it, then I see the new TTC subway stop being built in Vaughan, and I say, what the heck's going on? Mississauga, who led the 905 development in the first place, who had the big growth, we sat there, we voted in governments consecutively, and no government did anything to help us get a subway station. We need one in Mississauga. Mississauga's a large city. So that kind of divide makes us start to wonder in Mississauga and Brampton and say, what the heck's going on? You look at the road construction. Who decided to build the 410 straight up to Brampton and not think you need some kind of parallel road to the 410? If the province knows, telling you you have to develop based on density targets, who Who was the brainiac who said you don't need relief roads along the way off the 410? Because the 410 is worse than the Don Valley Parkway. So I think in those type of things, I think there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of concern for some of my friends when we talk around the table saying, when Hazel steps down, who's going to be the strong voice in the West to say, you know what, Toronto, okay, we'll argue with you over TTC and, I'm not paying any extra taxes because property taxes for us are way higher than Toronto. I'm no crocodile tears here. But at the same time, I want to know why a place like Vaughan, that's still not a fraction of the size that we are, is getting what they're getting. Is it because of...
They elected a finance minister.
And I think people have those type of discussions. I think that leads to the next point is, in the 905, the issue of transparency. Because the media does not cover, we need more transparency in municipal government in the 905. Linda Jackson is an example. I don't know, I'm in Brampton right now, and we scratch our head saying, what are we doing around City Hall? What's going on with the hydro surplus money? What's going on in all these cities? And what's Mississauga going to do when the development revenue stops? So we have to start asking ourselves in the 905 first, what are we doing? Because we're not the little sister anymore. We're a big brother at the table.
I think Brian might know who he wants to be the next mayor of Mississauga. But anyway,
I have a point of the issue, and I think it will be a strong, powerful person. But the reality is, institutions matter, and no matter how strong of a person you have in Mississauga, when you have 2.4 million people in not the whole 905, but in the 4 regions right around Toronto, versus 2.6 million people in Toronto. You have one mayor for that 2.6 million people and one council for that 2.6 million people, and 24 mayors and 24 councils for the 2.4 million people that are in the 905 around, excluding Hamilton and Niagara. You end up not being able to have the voice. Back to this Western GTA Summit, I had meetings with Mayor Fennell in Brampton and Mayor Burton in Oakville, and they said, you know what, if we make a comment on transit and the importance of transit, we might be lucky to get a paragraph in the major downtown Toronto newspapers. But if the Mayor of Toronto, whatever he does, it'll end up being a big issue. And we've seen just in the last by-election in Scarborough how a political football of a subway extension can be taken over because of the importance of and the cohesive nature of Toronto. And you go back 25 years, Ann Golden, who did the Greater Toronto Area Report, what she actually never said was an amalgamation of all of Toronto. What she wanted was an expansion of Metro Toronto and have the 905 have seats on some sort of a council. So I think what we need to do is we need to think through some institutional methodologies to have the whole voice of the Greater Toronto Area. And one of the lines that someone used at our Western GTA Summit, which I thought was great, is we need someone to put the great back in the Greater Toronto Area, because we're no longer the Greater Toronto Area. We're Toronto and we're the suburbs around Toronto.
The 416, especially on the transit issue, which is really what we keep coming back to, the 416 is so dysfunctional all by itself. That's a problem that needs to get fixed, or else no one from the 905 is going to be able to get into it. I mean, I can take a GO train that's going to get me right downtown in good time and for a relatively affordable price every morning. Then what do? I'm stuck at Union Station, and if I have to go more than basically a few blocks up Yonge Street or out across Bloor, I got nowhere to go. It's just not worth it. So in order for the 905 to really have much value getting into the 416, you need to be able to move around within it. And I think I think an important thing for the 905 is to have an effective transit system within Toronto, because we got to go somewhere. I mean, we were joking before we started taping. Every 905er has their little secret cheat route to get into Toronto. Mine gets busier every day. I have to leave 5 minutes earlier every year that goes by. Commuting up from the National Post to my home in York Region, I used to be able to leave at 4 o'clock and I'd beat all the traffic. Now it's about 3:40. And that's 5 years. So unless people can move around within the city and you get Torontonians out of their cars, and it's got to be convenient for them, it's got to be affordable, there's not going to be any road space for the 905ers to get into the city. I mean, that's what happens. You drive down out of your nice little suburb and you go by all the picket fences and the parks and the Tim Hortons, and then you hit the freeway, like you said, the 410, or you get into the city itself, and it's gridlock. And the thing that scares me is the gridlock's not on the freeways, it's everywhere. There's nowhere else for the cars to go.
Doug, last week you tweeted a lot about an incident that took place in the U.S. Tom Matzies, who's the former director of the political group MoveOn.org, about a conversation he overheard, and then he tweeted about. Tell us about that. What happened there first?
This guy was seated on a train between Washington, D.C. and New York City, and he was some sort of activist, but for our intents and purposes, he was just an ordinary guy. And he realized that the person sitting in the seat in front of him was the former director of the National Security Administration, the U.S. spy agency that's been in so much trouble for allegedly bugging people's phones. And he realized that what this former NSA director was doing off-the-record, deep background interviews with major journalists from the United States' largest media organizations, basically pouring poison in the ear of Barack Obama.
In a public place, on a train.
Well, he was on a train. He was doing these deep background records as a former senior administration official, or something to that effect, saying that the White House is wrong. They're making mistakes. They're doing terrible things, and so on. So this guy just live tweeted the whole conversation that he overheard. And of course, this caused a controversy. Some people from traditional media backgrounds said, "Oh, well, this he shouldn't be doing this. He should be getting the other side, or asking this guy's permission, etc."
You argue that he had an ethical duty.
He was doing basic, fundamental journalism. If you see something of significant public value, and I would argue that the former director of a spy agency, the man responsible for that spy agency's controversial policies, if he is lobbying against the President of the United States using these channels, this piece of information is of great value to people. And I don't mind him presenting it in a way that's entertaining by tweeting every sentence. It does not all have to be this cut and dried world. We've created this image of journalism over the years that it has to be this almost forensic task where you have to have well-cultivated sources, and you have to balance everything you do and so on. Well, you're just writing. You're telling a story. You're explaining things to people. Sitting on a train and hearing something interesting of great public significance, just say it. It's fine.
Tom, do you agree with that? That this was just old, traditional style reporting? Overhear something that's interesting, send it out, tell the world about it, tell the Twitterverse about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a raw ingredient quality to a tweet that you don't have in a story that you spend weeks or even hours on. But absolutely, that's journalism at its essence. You find things out and you make them public. Now, journalism also involves editing, making choices, verifying. It was interesting, the conversation we had before about whether balance, how balance is a technique that to try and make things accurate, but it's very flawed. The problem of balance is, as Daniel said, predates the internet. The real essence of journalism at its best is verifying and contextualizing facts. Mm-hmm. So when you're tweeting one conversation, your context is much more limited, but gradually over time, we were able to get a lot more information about who was tweeting, and journalism and even truthfulness is what emerges.
Sometimes in the mainstream media, we see politicians, whether they be local, provincial, federal, snubbing the mainstream media. Do you see the same thing when you go to cover politicians?
Yes, there is, but there's the impression out there that these politicians are quite friendly with the ethnic newspapers, but I don't agree with it.
Why not?
There are some politicians who are good politicians, and they're talking about the community, and we're talking good story. Yes, they behave good with us, but if we're talking something challenging for that politicians, they snub us too. So it's the same. It's the same thing. It's I don't agree with it that they snub only the mainstream people, but yes, they have the same behavior with us as well. That challenge is there as well for us.
James, has that been something that you've been seeing at your paper as well?
Well, I get a feeling that they pay attention to us mostly during the election times.
Then they'll talk to you.
Yeah.
April, it's what Jagdish saying true. We do hear this narrative that the Prime Minister, for example, some federal cabinet ministers choose to go to the ethnic press while perhaps staying out of the mainstream press. What's your assessment of that happening?
Well, I think they definitely were doing that, for instance, during the 2011 election. And part of it is that politicians, just like some advertisers, are actually starting to recognize that there's a whole bunch of voters there that they want to get their message out to. So of course they're going to, try and manipulate the media, whether it's ethnic media or other media, in the way that they can best get their message out. But when you've got a growing group of voters who are living in a concentrated area, like in the Brampton area, for instance. Those ridings are hotly contested during elections, and candidates actually from, the South Asian community are running in those ridings, and and the leaders of the parties are showing up there. So, the Prime Minister and some cabinet ministers have been quoted as saying ethnic media is the new mainstream.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I think James's point is they're the new mainstream when there's an election on.
Okay, we're not in the election
I
season.
agree with her. Yes,
You agree
we
with her.
are the new mainstream.
Okay, we're not in election season, and so I want to talk about what stories are in your paper today. James, what's on the front page of your paper today?
We did a story about a memorandum of agreement between the TDSB, the Toronto District School Board, and the organization called Alpha. It is to promote, I guess, accurate historical education on World War II and what happened during that time in Asia. Like everybody knows about the Jewish Holocaust, what the Nazi Germany did to Jewish people, but not many people know about what the Imperial Japanese did to their neighbors. And I think that the agreement was to look for ways to educate, put into the curriculum about the atrocities like the massacre of Nanjing and the forced recruitment of sex slaves, those kind of things.
So a real local story that isn't covered in the mainstream media. And on most days, would there be more coverage of local issues in your paper or of news from the homeland?
But 60-70% it would be local.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website. That's theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.